more questions and comments now. We've got a large audience here, and we've also got people watching online. So we really appreciate the fact that you made yourself available to join us for the presentation. Thank you very much. Now, can we open the floor to questions, comments? Yes.
Thanks very much. Is it on? Yes, I think it is. My name is Nick Hall. I also work for Plan International, in fact, and we work quite closely with the ministry in Haiti as well. And I wanted to pose a question to the ministry there, which was to do with the fact that a significant portion of the education system is being in the private sector hands, faith-based organisations and so on, and not so much in government hands prior to the earthquake, and what your strategy is for trying to assure parents that children who go back into the private sector, which presumably a lot will go into schools that are safe and are providing a good learning environment. So it's really part of the long-term strategy.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to respond to that question? Mr. Laguerre?
Yes. Please, please repeat for me the question. I'd like to understand better the question.
So
yes, the sound was not very clear. So if you could repeat the question, please.
Okay, I'll try. I don't know if I've captured it all. I think it was Nicole, is that right, from Plan International, was commented that a significant proportion of education in Haiti before the earthquake was being provided through the private sector, being delivered by a variety of actors, including churches, NGOs, and others. And so he's asking really what the government's strategy is for making sure or assuring parents that their children are going to go back into safe environments where the quality of education is going to be good or to be adequate. Is that accurate? Could you hear that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Now we have a special program for helping families with the help of World Bank and IDB, and we have in that program we offer 250 $2,500 to each, and that's we adopt that strategy only for the five months that we work in the school in the areas was affected by earthquake. So we would like to plan for the future, because we have to. If children have to go back to school, we know that families can now afford for the children. That's now our big challenge in the country.
Okay, I don't. Did you have a follow-on question, or did that answer? Okay. Thank you very much. We're going to take some more questions now. Let's take someone from over here first, and then the lady at the back.
Hello, I'm Tonya Schmidt. I worked for 6 years with Samaritans, a UK NGO, and I was, for part of that, responsible for a psychosocial education program in the UK. And I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about what the psychosocial education that you mentioned that you're introducing in Haiti is. And was that part of the curriculum before the earthquake, or is that something that's been introduced as a result of it?
Could you hear that question, Mr. Laguerre?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, please go ahead.
Okay. After the earthquake, we had a commission working on I can say a specific curriculum for helping autism children to understand the signification of of an earthquake in the country. So we know that we have to continue working on that curriculum. And when I'm talking about we have to form our curriculum, I mean that's trying for long term, because we were working on the curriculum having 25 years, and we think that we have to modernize our curriculum. And nowadays we know that we are conscious that we have to integrate the features like hurricane and earthquake in our curriculum. Yeah.
Thanks. My name's Julia Modern. I'm from Results UK. I actually have two questions. One is for the Minister in Haiti and one is for Pauline. So it might be appropriate to ask them both now, or I could...
Yes,
okay.
Fine.
So the question for the Minister is about disability. And I'm aware that there was quite a high rate of disability among children in Haiti even before the earthquake, and obviously that is only going to increase due to the effects of the earthquake. And I wanted to ask whether the rebuilding of the education system will be taking that into account and will be making sure that as schools are rebuilt and as systems are rebuilt, that disability is considered and that those schools are accessible, and that, you know, you talked about reforming the curriculum, that also builds in disability awareness into that. My second question for Pauline was about the FTI. And you mentioned the reform process of the FTI. I think the working group on conflict had made recommendations many years ago now on how to make the FTI more effective in conflict-affected states. My question is just really, how do we speed up the reform, and how do we make sure that it's delivering for conflict-affected states, particularly with the view that several conflict-affected states are applying for funding from the FTI at the moment, including the DRC, for example.
Okay, let's start with Mr. Laguerre. Did you hear the question directed at you clearly, sir?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
So,
let's go ahead.
Yeah. Now, in the beginning of last week, we had special meetings with engineers working on the new structure for schools. So we know that we have many handicapped children now, and we know that we have to integrate them in our school system. In the ministry, we have a special committee working on that point, and I can assure you that we'll take into account these categories of children in our school system.
Okay. Pauline, would you like to?
On a quite different issue.
On a quite different issue, yes.
Thank you.
Completely
Yeah.
different.
On the fast track initiative, as you say, it's been an ongoing debate within the fast track initiative probably since its inception as to whether and how it should be supporting countries which aren't seen as good performers, and conflict-affected states being an important part of that. And in some ways, I think the stage it seems to be at is having gone full circle of going back to what was discussed a few years ago around having a progressive framework, so allowing countries to join and be part of it, even if they don't fully come up to the benchmark standards of what would have previously been seen as appropriate for endorsement. I think probably the FTI, I mean, has both in the last year, for those that don't know, been an evaluation of the Fast Track Initiative, and our report last year also had a section which looked in some detail at the way in which the Fast Track Initiative was performing, and I think there was sort of general acceptance that in general there were problems with the Fast Track Initiative, not just for conflict-affected states, but that probably these countries were even worse hit, and there are examples of countries that had been promised money in one way or another but still hadn't received money, again conflict-affected countries being amongst those, ones that had been where there'd been some promise of them or not promise in writing, but some indication that they would be receiving money, and then told to go down a different route rather than through the fast track initiative, causing a lot of confusion basically. Now it seems that it's back on the agenda, that these countries should be supported. But I think, in a sense, for it to be effective and for it to work, for me there's sort of two issues. One is that the more fundamental reforms that are needed of the fast track initiative more generally need to be in place. Some of those are already coming about. So, for example, previously the World Bank, the money was always being channeled through the World Bank through the World Bank systems within countries, which just wouldn't work for many conflict-affected countries where the World Bank might not be having an active presence. Now there has been changes to that by allowing the money to be channeled through different supervising entities, but I think there's a question as to how far that is going to happen in practice. Which agencies are going to be willing to take on that mantle, the risks that are there, the accountability mechanisms that are still going to need to be in place, how they work with the World Bank on it. So I think we're at a stage where that's still being tested in a sense. And the second is to do with needing to work differently in these countries and needing to recognise that the way that the FTI has worked in some of those countries that are not affected by conflict, that might be seen as easier countries for donors to work in, obviously has quite different implications, and I don't know that that's been fully thought through yet. So I think we're still testing it, but as you say, it needs to work fast if it's going to be effective.
Are you happy to carry on for a few minutes? It's now 6:35. We do have refreshments in the next room. Shall we carry on for another 5-10 minutes, if you're happy to do that? Okay. Please.
My question is for Soraya.
Yes.
I was wondering if... hi. My name's Tom Stocker, and I'm not anything particularly important. I was wondering what your experience was of Burmese refugees in the east of the country and in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, which aren't exactly conflict situations but quite close to them, and how education and primary education has been delivered, or what the problems are and the challenges are and what the difficulties are in those regions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think you know from the Myanmar, refugees are coming to the Bangladesh, and because of there is a problem inside the Myanmar, and they take refugees in Bangladesh, and most of the lot of refugees have returned through communications between the governments, but still I don't know exactly the number, but still there are a lot of refugees standing there because they both the governments they don't agree to they are not agree to take them back. Negotiation is going on, and few people are leaving. It's continuous problems for us because we have a lot of problems within ourselves. We have but international community and also government of Bangladesh, they are trying to give primary education because these children is also children we have to look after, and particularly some NGOs and government organizations, they give school in the areas so that they can get primary education. So this is going on. In Chittagong Hill Tracts, yes, Hill Tracts is a. There are government primary schools which have national curricula, and also there are some NGOs. They have started some schools. They have curricula with their own languages. That is a good thing that mother tongue they can learn through the mother tongue. So this is a good responses, and it's a hilly area, but still we give special attention to the areas, so that now the conflict situation is over now, so people can go and get access to the primary schools. It's good. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got two people here at the front. This lady in the pink first.
Hello, my name is Alba D'Souza, and I'm from the UK National Commission for UNESCO. Two questions. One is, I haven't heard any of the panel talk about food aid and the importance of school feeding in schools, both to increase participation rates and also to reduce dropout, well, also to increase retention rates in schools, and the importance for nutrition. And the second part is, well, I'm from Kenya, and been to the camps in northern Kenya, which have got lots of Somali and Eritrean and Ethiopian refugees. Now, they have the safe areas, and school is continuing there, the safe areas that you talked about. But the Kenya government does not allow exams, the Kenyan exams, to be taken in these camps. So there's really no progression for the children into any meaningful education and training. Are there any attempts to convince, I don't know whether the Kenya government is alone in this, or whether the Tanzanian government, with all its Rwandan refugees, also has the same problem, or how endemic the problem is, where the government of that country doesn't allow its national examinations to be held in those countries.
Thanks. Should we take this next question as well and then answer them?
Okay, my name's Zara. I work at DFID, but nothing related to education. This is just an interest of mine. I was just wondering, in the case of, like, what strategies are in place for children that are fleeing conflict? So they're not in IDP camps or refugee camps, but equally rebuilding a school is pointless because they're in the middle of it. And obviously, if their accreditation and qualifications won't be relevant in one school to another, and there might be a case where their papers or their school books or whatever are, taken away from them at any point. So what strategies are in place to cater for their educational needs?
Okay, thank you.
Sure, I'm happy to
Yep.
take a couple of those. First, on the school feeding question, I think one of the things that's particularly interesting is the outcomes that you described, which are broadly targeted towards educational outcomes as opposed to nutritional outcomes. I think it's very, very important that we distinguish if we see that there's an opportunity to integrate that, or we see that by providing food to be taken home or to be had in the school there, that we look at the broad outcomes and not mix, or see it as intersectoral, not simply about nutrition, because you're not going to reach the most vulnerable under fives malnourished through a school feeding program, but it can have can be an important aspect of overall approach to a response. And so, yeah, sorry it wasn't mentioned, but I think it's really important to make sure that that is the most cost-effective way of doing it, and that you're actually reaching the most vulnerable. The only way you reach the most vulnerable in that process is to make sure that actually the most vulnerable are showing up at school. And so they sort of tie together, and that girls are coming to school, and that the poorest are coming to school. If not, a school feeding program isn't going to actually be the most effective way of getting nutritional outcomes and feeding out to the population. So they tie together as part of an integrated response. There's a general, your comment about refugees in northern Kenya and your comment about children fleeing conflict. A lot of it has to do about have they crossed borders or not, are they in a different education system. There are certainly work that we did on the Liberia-Cote d'Ivoire border. It comes particularly when they cross into a different language area. There's a whole question about what curriculum are you teaching, what language are you teaching, and I look to, I don't know if anybody has any particular answer to the Kenya advocacy question, but I think I'd like to take that one away and ask our Kenya team who are working in the camps in the north, are we on top of this, and if there's an advocacy point there. And it's actually one of two things you might want to do. In some cases, you might want to have the national curriculum of the host country be the one offering the exams, but actually there's other situations where you want children to continue to study in the curriculum of their home country to which they'll return, and to find ways to do that. And I think that's obviously very hard, and I would ask if there's any somebody wanting to put their hand, without another question, if there's any answers, particular answers to that. But I think it shows how it is a very tricky aspect, something we look at in our approaches. I don't have at hand a great story on solving that one. Maybe someone else does.
Yeah, Pauline, do you want to?
Yeah, I can maybe just come back on that specific issue. I'm sure other people have a lot more knowledge, but just from my brief experience, the children in northern Kenya can now take the Kenyan School Leaving Certificate exam. The concern is that they have very, very limited opportunities beyond primary schooling. So although the education providers, in that case, CARE is providing primary schooling, an NGO called Windle Trust is providing secondary schooling. While they do have some secondary schooling, it's not enough for all those that are getting through the primary school certificate. On top of that, at the end of the day, they might get their education certificates, but there's nothing they can do with them. They don't have the right to work, and that, in a sense, is probably one of the most fundamental issues that goes beyond just the education system, but makes the intersectoral linkages being a really important point, and the role of the host government being an issue in that. And I think the debate around what curriculum to use is clearly one that is very closely discussed, and in these camps it's the Kenyan curriculum, partly because you've got children from different nationalities, from different countries, so what curriculum would you use? Also because, for example, in Somalia, when they are hopefully going back to Somalia, they will no doubt be reconstructing from quite an initial stage the education. So within that area, at least, the Kenyan certificate is recognised, and I think that links in with your question to some extent, that this will vary from context to context, but at least around that environment, that is a certificate that will be recognised, and that's a reason that is given for using the Kenyan curriculum in that setting. More generally, there are clearly issues around what is going to be recognised. So for those that are not in camps, that are going through, who are living in conflict zones, that are going through more non-formal or informal education settings, often the communities themselves continuing the education. I think we should also remember that, because there is such high demand, as we were discussing earlier, communities themselves often keep it going. But that's not necessarily going to lead to this official certificate that will be needed to be recognised for when hopefully the country returns to peace. That there are agencies that do a lot of work on this, and some sort of analysis that has looked into the ways to actually try and address this. It's both for the students as well as for the teachers. As I said, those refugee teachers who are teaching without really any qualifications or training, but for example now in southern Sudan will hopefully be going back and be in a position to teach in schools, but they need to be recognised and their experience needs to be recognised, and that's one thing that I think there is sort of acknowledgement of. One thing, just to link in with a school feeding debate, I think there's a lot of really interesting work actually going on in ODI around the shifts from food aid to cash transfers, which is another debate, but I think actually has implications for education in a context where such little aid goes, humanitarian aid goes to education, and for good reasons. There is a lot of aid that goes to food, but by shifting to some extent from actual food to cash transfers allow people to make more choice over how they spend the money where there is where they have that opportunity. So I think it's a slightly different issue.
Soraya.
Yes, I have a just small response to the question about school feeding. We have in earlier case we have, as he said, that cash food for learning, something like that. But now we have shifted for cash for learning, and I think this has a tremendous impact on Bangladesh because the primary education enrollment has been very high, because it was 72%, now it is 94%. So this is a very good response, and we have few school feeding programs. It's still it is on project basis, and we are looking at how it going to respond. But we feel in the program 3, as we said, government has a planning to feed the children in the school, so that nutrition and also the school attendance are better. It is the future program for the government. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Laguerre, are you still with us?
Okay. Yes, I'm still.
Yes. Did you have any comments that you wanted to make on any of the questions? Any responses?
Okay, so we have a dream in Haiti now, and there have many lessons that we learned from our earthquake. And our dream is to have a new school for children in Haiti.
Okay, I think we got that. Thank you very much. I see that we're now at 10 to 7, so we're well over time. I wonder if I could ask, Liam, we don't have anything from people watching online.
We have one question.
Yeah.
From Maria, who's at the University of Sussex, and says, as Pauline mentioned, poor quality provision can contribute to conflict. In many conflict or post-conflict situations, teachers' conditions and teachers' salaries are an issue. But donor funding to support teachers' salaries can also be problematic, including issues of sustainability and job market imbalances compared to doctors, nurses, etc. Is there any evidence of situations where donor support in this area has been efficient and phased out appropriately?
Okay.
That's a tricky one to end on.
Yes.
I mean, I think if we're talking about situations where in conflict itself, I would say that teachers' salaries are not generally seen as a high priority. Firstly, education generally isn't seen as a high priority. In many of these settings, teachers are recruited in less formal ways. So, for example, in northern Kenya, as what they call incentive workers, teachers with limited qualifications, but provided with training by the NGO providers and so on. The question is partly then in the post-conflict or setting as countries move into peaceful environments, and you've got teachers who, as I was saying, might have some experience but not fully recognised. I think Afghanistan is quite an interesting example where they have made moves quite quickly to get teachers onto a register to make sure that they are recognised. And through a multi-donor trust fund, the Afghanistan Reconstruction Trust Fund did actually move towards, this was able to help to pay for teachers' salaries. So I would say that's a more positive example to look into.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Pauline. And I think we're going to have to end now. I want to thank in particular our 4 speakers, but especially Ms. Soraya and also Mr. Laguerre for joining us. Despite the difficulties of the technology, I think we were very happy to at least hear your views. So thank you so much, Mr. Laguerre, for participating, Soraya, Pauline, and Greg. We have so little time, and it would be difficult to sum up the discussion, but I think it was very interesting to hear about the challenges and the responses of the Bangladeshi government and what they're doing, as well as in Haiti, post-earthquake and pre-earthquake, and issues around psychosocial support, how you actually move from a system that was very reliant on the private sector into one where the government has a bigger role in Haiti, are very interesting ones. I think Greg's 5 points that he mentioned and that were expanded on by Kate in the audience, adding resilience and state legitimacy to those 5 points, looking at the scale of neglect in the education sector and what still remains to be done, and focused also on DRR, which I think several people in the audience also highlighted were also important issues. Pauline's presentation on the conflict-affected states also gives us a lot of food for thought, and I think we're going to be looking forward to the report, and I'm sure many of you are involved in feeding into that. I think we'll leave it at that. Liam tells me that we're recording this session, and so it's possible to watch it again. We're going to put some notes up on the website of the key points from the meeting, and I'd just like to thank you again and to invite you all next door. Is it this side? this side, where we have some refreshments for you. So I hope you'll join us there and you'll continue talking during that session. Thank you very much.